The regenerative approach fundamentally seeks to do more good and not just to do less harm when we develop our cities. It goes beyond mitigating a city's developmental impact to restoring and growing social and ecological systems. And by emphasizing greater integration of urban planning strategies, such as nature-based solutions, low carbon development, and resource circularity, it seeks to maximize livability, resilience, and resource outcomes for both people and the environment. Some cities will not be starting from scratch, but already have in place urban policies and planning strategies with regenerative elements. In Singapore, for example, we have been weaving nature into the built environment to tap on its multifunctional benefits for climate adaptation, improving well-being, and stewarding our native biodiversity. And I'm sure many of us in the room appreciated this, particularly during the closed period of the pandemic. To further realize the potential of regenerative design, we have to identify new opportunities for innovative integration between our urban systems that allow us to maximize the code benefits. As we do so, we expect to break new ground. To catalyze and scale regenerative design, we will require a collaborative ecosystem involving stakeholders across the public, private, academic, and people sectors. The CLC Regenerative Cities Forum series serves as a platform to facilitate this multi-sectoral collaboration by sharing best practices and to develop actionable solutions. Today, we are also pleased to launch the 25th issue of the CLC Urban Solutions publication. This one is themed on resilience and regeneration, and it features insights on regenerative design from experts globally, including 3XN's partner, Fred Holt, whom we have the pleasure of hosting as one of our speakers today. We're also pleased to announce that CLC will be signing a Memorandum of Understanding with the Singapore University of Technology and Design this afternoon. And through this MOU, we have identified areas of common interest for research, notably in the areas of mobility and urban livability, healthy cities, and regenerative cities. So thank you again very much for joining us here, and I look forward to a lively discussion and opportunities for further collaboration as we pursue a regenerative future for all our cities.
Thank you, Edie. We will now have the keynote presentation by Professor Cheong, Koon, Hean. Professor Cheong is the chairman of the Lee Kuan Yew Centre for Innovative Cities at the Singapore University of Technology and Design, which seeks to stimulate thinking and research to address critical issues of cities and urbanization through an interdisciplinary approach of urban science, design, and policy. She was formerly the CEO of the Housing and Development Board and the CEO of the Urban Redevelopment Authority. Professor Cheong, please.
Well, good afternoon. I see many, many familiar faces. It's very nice to see everyone here. Thank you for coming. Hope it's not the 2 CPD points. But it's such an interesting topic. But thank you for coming and joining us. And I'm really very happy to join you today. But before that, because I am also involved with CLC, I see a lot of people standing. Is there some way to get them some chairs just to highlight to the organizers? Okay, I'll leave it as that as a comment because I see a lot of them standing up. Yeah. But thank you for coming. So today, I think what we like to do is really to address some rather significant global challenges that we're all facing. And it's really becoming increasingly urgent and threatening the future of our communities and our cities. So let me just get started. So this is what I'm going to talk about. Sometimes you can't believe that Singapore can be quite beautiful at times. It's a beautiful picture. You've got to find the right angles. And our job here is to continue to make it beautiful, right? Okay. Well, the world, I think to you, you know this, We are really in the midst of what we call a triple planetary crisis of climate change, biodiversity loss, and pollution and waste. And this is often highlighted by the United Nations Environmental Programme. But these crises are really interconnected, and they have to be tackled together if we're to secure our future. Not in siloed manner, but together. And that's quite a tough job. Well, efforts to combat climate change have seen both progress and setbacks. There's now greater global awareness and policy commitments like the Paris Agreement and advancements in, of course, the adoption of green technology. But our emission reductions remain insufficient to meet the 1.5 degrees centigrade goal. And unfortunately, the pace of systemic change is slow due to economic and political challenges, and particularly as we have seen in the last, it's only been 2 months, all those changes that climate change is put at the side and not at the center. And the current projections suggest that really without very drastic immediate action, global temperature will likely surpass 1.5 degrees centigrade. And of course, this will lead to more severe climate impacts. The global average temperature data, culled from 6 international organizations, show that 2024 is the world's hottest year on record and the first to breach the 1.5 degree centigrade mark. And in COP29 recently, some of you were there, in Baku, Azerbaijan, it has pressed for more ambitious action and resource mobilization to effectively address this escalating climate change problem. Unfortunately, the politics also come in since then. And in the past 50 years, our global consumption of resources has tripled. Global extraction of raw materials is expected to rise by 60% by 2060, driving increasing damage, carbon emissions, and risks. Many of us will not be here in 2030. Well, some of us will not be here, 2060. But our children and our grandchildren is going to suffer the consequences of our actions, all right? 2030, I think we'll be around, all right? Well, the UN Environmental Programme has raised the alarm and highlighted that such consumption is very unsustainable. We cannot merely exploit resources. We need to urgently reduce the resource intensity of mobility, housing, food, and energy systems to achieve a very just and livable planet for all. So that is a huge problem. And global biodiversity loss is also a very critical issue with significant consequences and arising from a combination of human activities. Much of it is caused by us, also caused by climate change and pollution. And irreplaceable ecosystems like parts of the Amazon forest, rainforest, are turning from carbon sinks into carbon sources due to deforestation. Maybe that's why COP30 is going to be held at the fringe of the Amazon forest this coming year, end of the year. And the 2022 Global Living Planet Index shows an average 69% decline in monitored vertebrate wildlife populations. And the UN also warned that some 1 million species are threatened with extinction. So if you look at the data, it's really quite frightening. If you look at Latin America and Caribbean, the loss is like minus 94%. That's really, really quite scary. And here we are all banking on the Amazon forest for the air that we breathe. It may not actually happen, right? So, to tackle these challenges, what has been our clarion call? For the last, as many of us have worked, The clarion call for the past decades have been to develop sustainably, right? Correct? That's our DNA, so rooted in us. Well, rooted in the 1987 Brundtland Report's definition, this was sort of the genesis of it. Sustainability is about meeting present needs without compromising the future generations' ability to meet their own needs. Simple definition. And sustainability principles have dominated discussions in our urban planning, in architecture, in environmental policy, And in fact, it is the key concept driving and guiding the UN's Sustainable Development Goals, which has become our mantra. However, even as we pursue these sustainable goals, unfortunately, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, IPCC, as we all know it, it reports that extreme weather events, rising temperature, and the shifting precipitation are accelerating, and they are jeopardizing public health, economic stability, and biodiversity. Well, the architect and theorist Bill Reed from Regenerative, he argues that sustainability aims to do less harm, but it does not necessarily lead to ecological or social improvements. The sustainability approach, as it is currently framed, can at best achieve a form of neutrality to mitigate negative impacts, but it fails to reverse damage already inflicted on ecosystems. Poor little lonely polar bear. Some have put it more starkly, and some say that sustainability is a slower way to die. What a frightening sentence, right? Which many of us spend our whole life trying to build sustainable cities. But it's meant to be provocative, all right? Maybe it's not as bad as it is. So please carry on with your sustainability actions. But there are now increasing calls to pivot towards a more holistic approach to guide our development pathways. And one concept that has progressively gained traction is to shift the paradigm, to expand our ideas from developing a sustainable city, which is still very important, towards developing a regenerative city. Such a city will go beyond sustaining the status quo of doing less bad towards doing more good by restoring and enhancing the natural systems that support urban life and contribute positively to the environment. The idea is to shift our strategies from ecological loss towards ecological gain. Now here, I very happily plagiarize many of the ideas from Arab, Rambo, Reed, and many people out there who have been talking about these things. I've just tried to sum it up in a very, very simple diagram. Well, Reed argues that it is a shift from a technical design to a living system design. The technical design lens, which we are all very familiar with, through which we view cities, often treat buildings and infrastructure as isolated objects. And the focus is very much on efficiency, material optimization, and harm reduction. And it often relies on very high-tech solutions to achieve energy-efficient materials, carbon offsetting, and minimizing waste. Nothing wrong with that. But maybe there's a better way. The living system design, on the other hand, sees human-built environments as part of a dynamic, interconnected system. It emphasizes place-based design, integrating local ecology, culture, and community needs. And instead of controlling nature, regenerative design fosters very symbiotic type of relationship between the human and the ecological system. Instead of breaking down problems into just separate parts, today we just focus on energy efficiency, water conservation, and biodiversity by different people looking at these things. Regenerative design really sees these as interdependent and seeks solutions that create multiple benefits. A preliminary scan of what practitioners and academics say about regeneration suggests that a regenerative city has some of the following attributes. The first is that it is nature as a partner. Nature is not just a resource, but a partner and central to design decisions. It mimics restorative aspects found in nature. Secondly, there needs to be an emphasis on very long-term thinking to consider the impacts on future generations and respect planetary boundaries. I think Arab writes a lot about this, respecting planetary boundaries. The approach is to build resilience and foster adaptability. It's not just about mitigation, but also adaptation. And it's about adopting systems and a big picture approach. The building is seen as only part of a larger ecosystem, helping to produce and share resources like clean water, energy, and food. Strategies should be grounded on the idea of achieving core benefits for both human and natural systems. And this involves maximizing core benefits across different livability, resilience, and resource efficiency objectives. You will hear this word a lot, core benefits. And everything is seen as a nutrient because a circular approach is promoted. We want to minimize waste and maximize resource efficiency. And we want to encourage new use for existing materials and to create positive environmental benefits. Urban metabolism serves as the central analytical framework for regenerative city building. That's another word we will hear a lot about, urban metabolism. And finally, it is actually also about community regeneration. These are just highlighting some points. There are many more to it. Why? Because it is also about regenerating collective mindsets, all of us here, and to renew our willpower to foster an interconnected existence with our environment. So the approach needs to be very inclusive, all right? That brings in individuals, communities, businesses, of course, government in the decision-making process. So what are some of the regenerative principles? I actually have been given time's up, but I'm going to run through the talk anyway. All right, I hope it's useful. I think at a building level, we've done pretty well, and later on you'll hear from Summ and you'll hear from Fred, all the wonderful things they're doing for buildings. And there are many interesting projects already being designed and built by architects who adopt regenerative ideas. But they focus a lot, of course, on minimizing waste, enabling future flexibility for retrofitting, and where possible, to minimally hit net zero or even net positive. Haptic and Rambo did a very interesting building. I picked this up. It's conceptualized as a very novel structure called the Regenerative Tower in Oslo, and it's built on a modular logic. It's actually made of timber. Its high-rise construction is built for maximum flexibility and longevity. The building can change its configuration to adapt to the city's changing needs. So the main structure frame consists of 3-story high structural decks. I think a lot of architects and engineers here. And each deck supports either 3 intermediate floor plates or 3 levels of what they call versatile pods. So it makes the system very adaptable as you change your needs from resi to office to hotel or production use, all right? And the natural materials, of course, timber, bring warmth, although here in Singapore we do take a care when we use timber. And it contributes to life cycle carbon management of the development. And actually underneath this building is a disused motor viaduct at its foundations, and they have reused it, which shows how infrastructure can be reused. Another interesting example, I think this is done by Arab and Splitterwork. It's the world's first algae-powered building in Hamburg, Germany. So basically, algae is grown on the exterior of the building in glass louvers. The algae continuously is supplied with liquid nutrients and carbon dioxide, and there's a water circuit system running through the facade. When the algae is ready to be harvested, they are transferred as a thick pulp to a technical room inside the building and then fermented to produce biogas to generate energy. And of course, the algae also screens the sun shading. Now, when I read about this project, I must say I'm a little squeamish. I can just see all of you saying, designed for maintainability, okay? But the point here really I'm just trying to make is that buildings can generate its own energy. It's a living system. You may not use algae, but maybe you have better ideas, all right? So I'm just here making a point about such a building. Regenerative principles can also be implemented at a master plan scale, and here you have Foster and Partners. They recently unveiled the plan for the redevelopment of the waterfront in Larnaca, a tourist city in the southern coast of Cyprus. The new project is actually commissioned by an oil company called Petrolina Group. And the idea is to gradually replace 2 kilometers of oil refineries located on the waterfront north of the town center. And the master plan has regenerative ideas. It gives back to Larnaca by enhancing the land's ecological value and doubling the length of the waterfront, and is accessible to the public. The new development is carefully stitched into the existing urban fabric. It's a catalyst for expansion for the city, and there's a network of shaded tree-lined streets and landscape plazas, all connecting the different elements of the master plan. They have 4 canals in this city, and these will all be rewilded to create new habitats for wildlife and bring greenery there. And they had an existing highway, which will be transformed into a verdant and pedestrian-friendly street with new amenities. So I think they also think about a more human-scale approach to extend the natural green of the city. And Larnaca's industrial heritage is celebrated through architectural design and the integration of industrial artifacts. So again, it creates new opportunities for living and to enhance the blue economy. Another example at a master plan scale is New York Climate Exchange. I think a lot of you will have read about this. Summ will be designing a new zero-emission university campus for Stony Brook University, which is one of New York's leading public research institutions. It's called the New York Climate Exchange. And the new buildings will be constructed on Governor's Island. It's about 172 acres in New York Harbor. It will house an international research center to look at dynamic solutions for the global climate crisis. And fortunately for them, they are supported by philanthropies like Simon's Foundation and Bloomberg Philanthropies, who has put in $150 million to fund this. It's going to be an engaging and interactive living laboratory. It's all electric buildings for the entire campus with on-site solar electrical generation and battery storage will meet 100% of energy demand and be net positive. 100% of the non-potable water demand will be met with rainwater or treated wastewater. 95% of the waste will be diverted from landfills, making this one of the first sites in the United States to achieve true zero waste certification. It'll be climate resilient, no basements, but they raise everything on stilts, I think, with living shorelines. And all new and renovated buildings will meet the Living Building Challenge standards, which is the first buildings in New York to achieve this certification. So they would be training people for green jobs. There's a lot of partnerships among universities, with Pratt University included, New York University, to do a lot of research together. And they bring in the citizens as well into the conversation. Now, at a more macro regional level, so from building to maybe district levels to macro level, we have an example in the Yarra Biodiversity Corridor. It's a high-impact reforestation project in southwest Australia. The goal is to create a 200-kilometer long green corridor from inland all the way to the coast, reconnecting remnant vegetation to 12 nature reserves across a 50,000 square kilometer area. Actually, it's not a new project. The project started in 2008, but since then they have planted like 30 million mixed native trees and shrubs across 21,000 hectares. The idea is that this biodiversity corridor will sequester and store carbon for 100 years. And over the project's life, more than 1.5 million tons of carbon will be sequestered by the trees already on the ground. So I think these are some of the ideas. Next, I bring you to New Zealand. I think many of you will have visited New Zealand. How many of you have visited Wellington? Okay, I think quite a number. It is the capital of New Zealand, not a big population, only about 200,000 people. But Wellington is the founding member of the Biophilic Cities Network. And its unique geography, natural history, cultural history, and the urban development all combine to make it really an extraordinary biophilic city. And in their Our Living City plan, that's their plan, they've outlined 3 goals. The first is to grow and enjoy Wellington's natural capital, especially in the areas of urban design, land use, space management, and water. Second goal is to transform the economy and reduce the impact on the environment. And the final goal is to show leadership through encouraging community actions and establishing partnerships. So they have 2 projects, which is quite amazing. They have developed Zealandia, which is the world's first fully fenced urban eco-sanctuary, with an extraordinary 500-year vision to restore Wellington's valleys, forests, and freshwater ecosystems as closely as possible to the pre-human state. Second is they have come up with this initiative called Predator-Free Wellington. It's an ambitious conservation project which aims to make Wellington the world's first predator-free capital city. I was in Wellington last year. We were assessing them for the Lee Kuan Yew World City Prize, and we gave them a special mention. I think Summ is here with me. And we actually went around and see how they trap rats. Okay? But it's a ground-up community effort which is really, really amazing. And you can Google and read more about it. It's just quite an amazing story. So, what about Singapore? As we develop, we will face climate change threats. We have resource limitation. I'm going to run through this quickly because it's like a mantra that we repeat at every talk, right? We have resource limitation. We need to optimize our resources. How do we densify and yet make it livable? And now we have to recycle brownfield sites. We are so built up already over many, many years. So how do we do it? And we all have to do this within a carbon-constrained world. All right? You can't generate a lot of, for example, embodied carbon. So for the next bound of urban development, we have to find ways to meet higher, even higher aspirations of livability in a carbon-constrained world. So the big question is, can Singapore shift to an even more integrative and holistic concept to become a regenerative city? All right? Well, this concept really is going to enable us to shift from a scarcity-driven perspective, which is really our DNA. Everything is not enough, right? Not enough land, energy, water. And this scarcity-driven perspective of trade-offs, can we shift the mindset to an abundance mindset of maximizing co-benefits across different objectives? So by integrating solutions, can we multiply the benefits? And I think there are some workshops that will be organized to actually discuss some of this. Actually, we have a very good start. And there are many excellent policies and practices by agencies and by the industry that exhibit regenerative principles. So again, you're familiar with this. I'll run through quickly. URA has a fantastic long-term planning, integrated planning process. MParks has great stewardship of our natural and green areas through its vision of city in nature. HDB has your sustainability and biophilic town framework. PUB has its ABC waters that naturalize our waterways and provide nature-based solutions to manage floods. JTC has innovative approaches to refresh our industrial assets to be more energy and resource efficient. And BCA's Green Mark scheme, very important, to drive not only a net zero target, but to be net positive. And I think they have encouraged the adoption of many ideas like design for disassembly, so that the industry become more aware of the need to design and build in a way that supports circular flows and recycling. And more than most places, Singapore is actually in a very good position to shift beyond a sustainable city towards becoming a regenerative city, because the opportunities are immense. At a macro level, our highly integrated administrative and planning system already provide a very strong foundation for us to find impactful urban solutions at multi-scale level that can achieve maximum co-benefit. I cannot overemphasize this. There are many, many projects out there, but they are all stand-alone projects. I think Singapore is in a very good position to actually take a far more integrated approach because we're not very big and we have those processes in place already. It's all about a very integrative and holistic approach. So you have projects like the upcoming Long Island reclamation. We can integrate multiple objectives in optimizing land use, achieving climate resilience, enhance biodiversity, and at the same time find new typologies for livability, guided by regenerative principles. Almost all our HDB towns will be rejuvenated at some point or other, and that's massive. So I've only put in a few bubbles here. Actually, it's the whole of Singapore. We are going to undergo one of the largest redevelopment programs in our history. Our history is not very long, but the entire Singapore will have to be redeveloped in some way. When I say redevelopment, it doesn't mean pulling it down, but it's actually a rejuvenation. How do we do it? So there are many questions, and some of the bubbles that I've shown there are all the projects already being on the table, being studied for the next probably 20 years to be developed, 10 to 20 years. So it's very real. This huge redevelopment and rejuvenation initiative is very, very real, all right? And we can relook at our grey, green and blue infrastructure, giving us a lot of opportunities to think through what can we do. Can our industries be replanned and reimagined as ways to resource economies around circularity principles? How do we improve our grey, green, blue infrastructure? So, the idea of a regenerative city really holds great promise as a possible next frontier for us in our development, but much more needs to be done in order to execute such an idea successfully. I've read quite a lot about regenerative cities, but I feel that the science that supports a regenerative concept is still emerging. There is a need to develop consensus across experts, all of you, and globally, on what might be the key elements and principles that define such a concept. Now, I'm very mindful as I say this that many of you have written books on it. I've read your books too, some of your books, all right? But I think there is scope to deploy very robust urban science methods supported by technology to provide data-driven insights for informed policy making, as well as to ensure the effectiveness of the urban solution. Government agencies, I see many of my colleagues here, you play such a central and critical role. How can you develop policies and planning processes that are integrated, holistic, which will yield impactful results at scale? So how do you create the regulatory frameworks that facilitate and incentivize this paradigm shifts? I think these questions can only be answered through a 3+1 collaborative effort between the public, private, and people sectors, as well as with academia. So in Singapore, we have a real opportunity to steer a new path, to steer away from our path of extractive urbanization towards a regenerative city that can become an active force of renewal. And CLC, of course, over these 2 days, is providing us with a platform to commence our conversations on the potential of this paradigm shift. And we invite your active participation, and I look forward to your contribution and your insights. Thank you.
Thank you, Prof. Cheong. We are so excited to have so many of you here with us today. For our guests on my left, do feel free to move to the right or sit on the steps where there are more space. CLC will now be signing a Memorandum of Understanding with the Singapore University of Technology and Design to establish deeper collaboration for knowledge creation and sharing in the areas of innovative cities, healthy cities, regenerative cities, mobility, and urban livability. CLC is represented by ED Hugh Lim, while SUTD is represented by Professor Tai Lee Siang, Deputy President, Chief Innovation and Enterprise Officer, Center Director at Design Z, and Program Director of Design AI. May I now invite ED Hugh and Professor Tai to the front for the signing of the MOU, please. We will now commence the MOU signing. May I now invite Edie and Professor Tai to remain at the front for photo taking. Thank you, Edie and Professor Tai. We will now proceed with the presentations. The first presentation is by Mr. Fred Holt, 3XN partner. Fred joined 3XN in 2010 and became partner in 2015. He has experience in a wide range of phases, from design and programming all the way through to documentation. Fred is also the design lead and partner in charge of the award-winning adaptive reuse project, Quay Quarter Tower in Sydney. Fred, please.
All right, thank you for having me. They said business attire, but a black t-shirt is an architect's business attire, so that's why I took off my jacket. I only have 250 slides to go through in 20 minutes, but it's a hard act to follow, I must say. So before I get into the transformation, I'm going to give a shameless plug on the office for those of you that don't know 3XN. It'll take me 30 seconds to a minute. But we are 3XN architects. I'm going to talk mostly today about transformation. But before I do that, I just want to introduce you to the practice. We have 5 studios globally. The 2 main studios are in Copenhagen and Sydney. What makes us unique is we also have a sustainability and behavioral arm called GXN. And they focus on behavioral design and circular economy, which is important in this discussion. So our practice, or our firm, is really research and practice. And these are all the disciplines that we actually have in the studio. So not all black t-shirt wearing professionals, but an anthropologist, a behavioral psychologist, and then sustainability engineers. And we have a mantra: architecture shapes behavior, constraints inform the architecture. So we like to say our work is informed, not form. And that plays into our thinking about transformation. We work everywhere globally. 90% of our work is outside of Denmark. And we do a little bit of everything as well, I think, as any practice does these days. Of course, you'll see that today as well. We do quite a bit of work globally. We have the Sydney Fish Market, which I hope all of you will visit in November when it opens. Also highly sustainable, but maybe maybe you can invite me here for another discussion on that one. But that's under construction. Towers that look at green factor in Melbourne, projects in Japan that tries to block all of that hard east and west sun, residential developments in Toronto that change the way we think about public space, museums in China that's currently under construction, and then an adaptive reuse theater in Sydney as well. Another performing arts building in Korea, Red Bull Arena, also a sustainable project, university, children's hospitals, and then, of course, buildings that I'm going to talk to you about today. This high-rise, a transformation project in London, and then most of my discussion will focus on Quay Quarter Tower. Did I manage that in under a minute? Probably not, right? So this was 8 years of my life. I have to try to condense it down to a handful of slides. But transformation, I think the important thing to talk about is actually what is transformation. Transformation is leveraging existing assets. That's what it is. Why do we do it? A multitude of reasons, but really it's to extend the life of a building and extend the embodied carbon. So it's a sustainable approach, and it's that first step in the regeneration process. We all know why we do it. Material scarcity, we're building twice as much as we have since recorded time. There's drivers, there's the energy use from our particular sector is close to 40%, a third of the global waste. We've already talked and heard about the 1.5 temperature change. So the only thing that we have to really try to control in the building industry is to reduce our carbon drastically. Not a slow shift, but a drastic shift. And we're really good from an operational carbon point of view, but it's the embodied carbon that's really slowing that process. There's lots of key drivers for transformation. Informed tenants, for example, in Australia. Capital investors, one promising to be carbon neutral by 2030. They're driving change. In Australia, in London, for example, it's planning policy. And then there's KPIs that are associated with it. So every region has their own drivers. But at the same time, there's still this flight to quality. Everyone still wants a great place to work. They want that social environment that promotes well-being. As an industry, we're really good at this. Right? This is building. We're exceptional at it, down to the millimeter. But we're really bad at demolition. And I'm going to talk at the end about disassembly versus demolition. When we think about transformation, this is typically what we think about. This is worth preserving. That's how we think about our work in the architecture industry. But is this worth preserving? Probably not, but it might be worth transforming. So our work in everything that we do, we try to reduce our environmental impact and elevate a user experience, because a project's only as good as the experience of its users in the end. So is this project worth preserving? No, it wasn't, but it was worth transforming. But before you transform anything, as we all know, I had a great lunch today and a walk with members from Center for Livable Cities and URA. There's certain questions you have to ask yourself. Can something be transformed? We have a checklist that we use in the office that starts off with 6 basic questions. If the majority of those answers are yes, then we move on to the next series of questions. And by the end, by the time you get through this 4 or 5 page questionnaire, our client knows how likely it is that they can transform that building, reuse it, and to what level. So it gets down to the detail of, is there asbestos in the mastic around the window, for example, quite detailed. Most of the projects these days that we're working on in London, and then some projects in Australia, we required, or we actually assessed the building from 3 different viewpoints: a full knockdown, a full retention, and then something in between. And as part of that process, we find out where that sweet spot is for commercial viability, sustainability, and then also user experience. And on all of our projects, we look at transformation in different ways. There's the traditional way where you retain a heritage building, you add on, you bring vitality back to that space. Others, there's a refit where you have a part of the city that's underutilized, so you put in, you insert something in there that actually links, in this case, 2 railroad depots that are now part of a museum and public engagement, and an active part of Denmark's 2nd city. There's refurbishments, of course, where this isn't our design, by the way. But would you stay there? Maybe. But this is what we did to it. And it wasn't a knockdown, actually. The construction time was quite low. We stripped it, and the reason we could do that is the concrete was in great shape. So we could strip back to the structure, save all that embodied carbon, and then revitalize the project, give new life to a building that was nearing its end of commercial life. And now it's actually quite popular. We've done the same thing for a project, a university outside of Stockholm, an old pool hall that was outdated. Now it's an active part of the university. And I like to say, years ago you were swimming for sport, now you're swimming in knowledge. The building on the right, that was the pool, and now it's a library and an exhibition commingling space. So that's more traditional ways of transformation. Now, I think where things get really interesting is when we think about how we can save as much embodied carbon as possible. In some instances, it is the structure. And other, it could be the materials that actually surround that building. So this example of transformation, it's more upcycling, and it's a project in London. No, it's not one of the tall projects, but if you just look over to the left, there's a high-rise that's about the somewhere about the midway of the quite tall buildings. It's also a form of transformation. In London, there's planning policy that is kind of forcing the industry to look at retrofit or reuse before the traditional knockdown and build up. But it's a high-rise. It has to, commercial high-rise, it has to meet the demands of tenants. You need those social well-being spaces. You need an active ground level. So that's all very traditional. It's a great building in terms of how it addresses tenant needs and the city. But this is where it gets really interesting. On the left is the existing building. Now that was designed for X number of floors, steel construction. There's no way that the foundations and the structure can actually support a high-rise. So what else could we do? The idea was to assess the materials that are actually in the building, assess their viability, look at the CO2 impact of retaining some of those materials. And prior to policy in London, we at GXN and 3XN, we always looked at buildings as a potential for urban mining. There's a huge amount of resources that go into buildings. In fact, the demo image that I showed you, that when you demolish a building, there's a lot of inherent value in the building, but when you demolish it, the owners get about 2% of that original value. So how can we actually utilize those materials in a different way? And it's very similar to a material passport. As part of the pre-demolition audit, or part of the planning process, you have to do a pre-demolition audit. You have to account for every square meter, every cubic meter of material that's in the building. And for us, this was a treasure trove. It was a gold mine of information. So we took that, and the office, we started to look at how we can actually reuse some of those materials. So we did an upcycling catalog for the client, showed them the potential reuse of the kilometers of piping, square meters of panels, and then wound up looking at a handful of possibilities. One of those, this is a bit whimsical, right? You take all the pipes that are in the building, you can start making public furniture or bike racks. So that's whimsical. The carbon saving isn't drastic, but it sets the narrative for tenants that you can reuse. So from a narrative point of view, it's important. Glazing, we can never reuse glazing in new buildings. It won't meet the requirements. There's coating, so it becomes really difficult to do that. But we can crush it down to a powder and reuse that as a cement substitute in the terrazzo that we're using in the lobby space. Or crush it and turn it in, fire it and turn it into tiles to be used on the interior. These aluminum panels, great quality. They just need to be stripped, repressed, and then used for internal cladding. Or in Australia and London, end-of-trip facilities is really important. It's where you park your $20,000 speed bike, racing bike, and you get out of your Lycra and then into your business suit. So 1,600 lockers were pressed from the existing aluminum panels. We're also trying to take it a step further. So a typical slab to steel beam connection, you have a rod that comes up, the slab gets poured over the top, so it's really difficult to disassemble. What we're trying to do is actually look at the new slab having a mechanical fastening system so that we could actually reuse the slabs and the planks within the building to extend the life, again, of the embodied carbon. So first use, it goes away, but maybe the existing use. First use, it's 2FA. 30, 50 years from now, concrete gains strength over time. You need to recertify it, and then can it be used again for whatever the future might hold? By the way, that's not our design on the far right. So now we move on to radical reuse, AKA extreme adaptive reuse. This is the Euston Tower, also in London with British land. So there's a tower that was loved at one time, but fell out of favor in that particular area. There's not any tenants in the building. It's losing value. So the idea with the client was to reinstate it as an office building. But part of what you have to do in London is assess the existing structure and, again, retrofit before demo and rebuild. So we did that, of course. You could tell why it's not an attractive building for contemporary workplaces. Strip windows, limited floor spans, a convoluted mechanical system. But again, the concrete is in great shape. So we went through the 3 studies as we are doing now in buildings. And by the way, we worked on this with Arup in London as well. You look at what the floor plates size may be. You look at the floor-to-floor heights. All of this is on the checklist that we go through, and then you check the viability capacity of the structure. You then starts to assess various scenarios. If it's commercial office, if it's a hotel, if it's residential, and you weigh up the commercial viability of all those, and then also the structural capabilities. So you take the 2 outliers off. Full demo or full retention just wasn't possible. And then what you have is something in between. Remove the slabs, keep the core, keep the substructure. And on all of those, we actually wind up doing a carbon calculation per square meter. So that plays into decision-making with our client and helps inform the city for planning as well. So in the end, you remove the outliers, the two extremes. You look at retaining some of the floor plates, but then there's difficulty with maintaining those in position as you're demoing the rest. So in terms of commercial viability, structural viability, where we ended was actually retaining the existing core and the substructure, which is little over 30% of the existing structure. So much more carbon than, let's say, 2FA. And through that, we then wrapped a new steel structure around it. So what was old is new again. What was previously loved has new life. So this project is actually now going through planning. The design's changed slightly as these things, as this happens. But the idea of environmental transformation also extends to the urban environment. And I'm going to talk about that with Key Quarter Tower. We're also trying to cut out the concrete planks in the existing tower and reuse those within the new podium structure. So again, saving more carbon. So this is an image of the test where we're cutting out a portion of the slab between beams, and then of course testing it on its capacity. And the calculation is 337 kilograms of carbon would be used to make another hollow plank, a new one. If we can reuse those that were already in the building, we have a negative impact. And the only emissions that are generated from that would be the cutting and transportation, and then of course the certification. So we're pushing hard for that. Industry may or may not be ready for it, but it's important that we do push that agenda. All right, here's what I came to talk about. I probably have 2 minutes, but radical reuse. Key Quarter Tower, it's not just an environmental transformation, it's social and urban. And I'll explain a little bit about what that means. We had a 1976 tower that was at the end of its life, strip windows, poor performing facade. The asset owners were finding it really hard to rent it out, so losing value. As a result, the 4,500 people who were meant to be in the building weren't. So that also means that the urban environment is hurting because you don't have that population density to support local businesses. So this is the result, and I'll save the best part to the end. The concept's quite simple. Everyone wants to belong to, feel like they have a sense of community. We are doing a lot of horizontal campuses, green space, access to daylight, and then the sense of community, and we simply stacked it into a high-rise. Sounds pretty simple. This is the result. But the reason for that form is we had a planning envelope that we had to fit within. You'll notice the two diagonals cutting through and bisecting the tower. Those are solar planes. In Sydney, you have to protect public amenity with daylight, so we had to fit all the square meters within that envelope. The client gets all their value at the top of building above the heritage tower in front of us. So that's the reason for the shaping and the size of the upper floor plates of that tower is to fit as many square meters at the top. Yeah, I do have 1 minute. I might extend as well, sorry. This is the, I'll act like I didn't see it. This is the end result. You get a series of boxes or villages, vertical villages that actually shift to fit within the solar envelope. It provides outdoor terraces where I did see pollinators at the upper level, 200 meters, so that was impressive. But a building is also a social being as well. And this is a typical high-rise, no connection with your corporation or your colleagues. So we cut a deep hole into the floor plates that brought daylight deeper in, which helped reduce the mechanical load. There's a social spine that runs vertically up the building to create this sense of community in this vertical village. But you can imagine that we still needed to think about flexibility. If you have a 3-level atrium and you want to turn it into a 4 or 6 or 9-level atrium, you need to be able to remove the floor. So for flexibility, to extend the life of a building, we looked at actually removing the floor plate within that atrium space by creating deep, almost a space frame. So you could take it apart and then take it down the goods lift without building up scaffolding. So I'll flip through these quickly. I love to pause because I'm biased, but I really love the building. And then it reinvigorates a precinct, as I mentioned. So this was the precinct previously. This is the ambition, and then this is the built form. So active frontage, the tenants now are starting to move in. A really large, voluminous space that opens up onto the street, and then design that frames heritage and feels like it's authentic and belongs to a place, and then a rooftop podium as well that extends from the lobby space with native species. Operational carbon is also important. So the facade is one of the more salient features of the design as well as the stack. The facade is designed not for aesthetic purposes. It actually helps reduce the overall solar radiance by 30%. So it's informed design. So that solar radiance is essentially blocked, like you wearing a cap or putting your hand over your brow, and that helps reduce operational carbon. It also plays with your perception of the building and helps break the scale by shifting the direction it rotates, or that it shifts. Okay, now for the good stuff. We've transformed this 1976 building, nearly 50-year-old building, all concrete core, slabs, beams, and columns. Perimeter columns essentially acted as blinders, so unless you had a direct view to the harbor, you didn't see it. What we did to get it to this point is we cut a third of the building off towards the north, so got rid of the perimeter columns and slabs. The tower still stood because of the core. We then grafted on additional floor plate. We doubled the overall square meters. And I'll answer any questions about how we did that, of course. And then that doubled the overall square meters, doubled the population, and we only added 4 new lift shafts. And we did that by incorporating double-deck lifts. This is a time lapse of the actual construction. The scaffolding went up. The podium was demolished. The first third of the building was knocked out. Because the old structure had settled for 50 years, we could start applying facade to the existing structure. The new structure came up, and as the new structure begins to settle, we could start placing facade on it as well. And then as the building starts to rise, settles a little bit more, we could start filling in between old and new. The new structure stood by itself for a period of time, or had to on its own through temporary bracing, but then when it was done, temporary bracing came out, and now it's one structural unit. And the way that was done, of course, as I mentioned, we grafted onto the northern half of the floor plate. I'll be very quick, I'm sorry. Structural, there's risk associated with this. So there's not a contractor or client that's going to take on that risk without assurance. And this was done through creating a digital twin with our structural engineer. And you can imagine you don't know what the structural capacity of a building is until you strip off the facade and take some samples. So there was 1,600 concrete samples taken from this building. That allowed for almost real-time structural input along the way. So as a result, the overturning that's a natural part of buildings with cantilevers and the twist could be accounted for in a very exact way versus being extremely conservative and building everything larger than it needs to be, which would cost more carbon. There's a lot of sensors. The plumb line added the best indication of vertical movement during the build. It didn't move this much, but this is an exaggeration. I think the engineers had a bit of fun with it. But what that real-time structural digital twin told us is where we needed to strengthen the existing core. So rather than be super conservative and put sleeves over all the new columns around the core, we could be more strategic, saving money, time, and carbon. So in some instances, there was carbon fiber strips, other instances, plates that actually sandwiched the core. The movement actually was measured, predicted, and then measured during the course of the build. And the difference between the actual movement when it was finished and the digital twin was 4 millimeters. So that mitigated the risk. Okay, I'm wrapping up. Why do we do it? We know this. We need to reduce energy, need to reduce waste, help lower the temperature by reducing carbon. That's the reason for it. This is the good news story. We saved 12,000 metric tons of carbon. That's huge, saved an existing structure. But we all know in this room that doesn't happen unless it makes economic sense. It is a circular economy for a reason. It saved 9 to 12 months of demolition time, which actually was the equivalent of 150 million Australian dollars. That was back in 22. I'm sure with cost escalation that amount will increase. And it brought the owners revenue into that site 1 year sooner because of the 12 months of demo time that it saved. So it also makes great sense. And the purpose of me talking about it is we want to transform behavior. We want to allow asset owners, cities, city planning to look at something like an aged asset or an old part of the city and realize it can have a new life. Whether that's a podium that doesn't have any public-facing amenity or an old lobby that no one seems to love anymore. There's possibilities in retaining structure. As I get older, I like to think that I could also be looked at as kind of fresh and vibrant again, and we want to do that with our structures as well. So maybe we stop looking at demo like this, and we start thinking about dismantling and reusing elements in order to save carbon. Thank you.
Thank you, Fred. The second presentation is by Mr. Wong Summ, Founding Director of WOHA and Professor in Practice at the National University of Singapore for the Integrated Sustainable Design Master Studio. Summ won the President's Design Award in 2020 for his design of Kampong Admiralty. He also sits on the nominating committee of the Lee Kuan Yew World City Prize, the Design Advisory Board of Design Singapore Council, and is also a member of the Council on Tall Buildings and Urban Habitat, Masters of Tall Building and Vertical Urbanism Advisory Panel. Summ, please.
Fred, I've been going to Sydney the past few years, and I always walk around the city, and I'm always taking reference with your building. So from that point of view, I think you've done a great job in redefining the skyline of Sydney. Today is a little bit of a sharing for me. I think most of you here kind of know what we do in the buildings that we've been building here in Singapore. But I think I kind of want to share with you how we think and what we are concerned with. 15 years ago, we decided that we had to do a book because we didn't think people understood us. And that when we put trees on buildings, people say, these are the funny architects who are also landscape architects, but they're neither architects nor landscape architects. So I think that it was a strange lecture that we had in Harvard 15 years ago, that we had funny questions that we realized that people didn't quite understand what we were trying to do. So we created this book. So we created this book 15 years ago, and this was actually quite instrumental in helping us to cement our thinking and our thoughts. And we wanted to share with people, decision makers, and also students generally, basically. But it underlies our belief and our philosophy that we have a very holistic, integrated approach to sustainability, and that we are concerned with systems that are social, ecological, environmental. System thinking is how we talk about our projects and also our bigger projects too. And form making really is at the end of the day to enable and optimize systems. So in this 4 chapters, you can see it starts off with the layering cities, which is a big, the big chapter where we are thinking about bigger things, bigger strategies. And I would want to highlight a few things here. We create this term, multiple ground levels. And when we talk about multiple ground levels, we think that ground levels can be multiplied vertically. And this is important, particularly for Singapore, where we are a land-limited place. we have to fabricate real estate. But we think that we can actually do better, we can actually fabricate ground levels. And when you think about ground levels, two things are very important. One is the sociable aspects of it. When you walk on ground, you can see people, look at people, make friends, you know, you find your life partners and so on. But also at the same time, on ground, you can actually plant trees. You can plant plants. So I think that the idea of this notion of multiple ground levels stems from the fact that we really want to create sociable, horizontal spaces in the sky. So that's a very important one. High density, high amenity is because if you create higher density, you also need to move up with amenities as well. And I think that is a very fundamental thinking, particularly for us, if you really want to keep our city livable, but keep building, we do really need to think about high amenities. The other ones I think are fairly straightforward, which I also would touch base on. Planting cities for us spells out the taxonomy of integrated greenery and typologies. Breeding cities is also a very important, sort of a interesting and important one for us, where I think it's now so relevant because we are thinking of climate adaptive strategies. And for us, we are a tropical country. We always talk about plazas, but plazas are such a European term. Open to sky just doesn't work here. So that's where we think it's very important. Tropical community spaces are spaces that are meant for the tropics. And I think we do have quite a few very good examples. One in Campo Marote. I think Kuan was one of the steering committee, understood that, and then we have this lovely plaza that I think the community comes together. And I think within 6 months, they saved $1.5 million without, because they don't have to put up marquees anymore. So I think that is a thinking I think is very important for us to actually realize that, you know, we may be spending some money now, but we will be saving money in the future, but it's all for the better of the people. So, and I think a few things too, which are quite fundamental in the way we use form, we actually fabricate and accentuate wind flows in buildings. Horizontal breezeways and vertical breezeways. So I'll show you a few examples of this later on in some of our projects. But the last one, rating cities, is actually for us is about redefining values. And these values are important because we want to share these values and urge, you know, particularly the commercial sector to actually take on these values. And I think this kind of ratings for us were important because it helps to not only for us to gauge ourselves, but to allow the client side or other stakeholders to see and to measure how we can actually have transformative and catalytic effects on our buildings. So these are the 5 ratings, and actually we do have more now, but this book is now almost more than 10 years. We started on the second version of this. But I think the one that I think is very relevant for us today is the community plot so it's the green plot ratio, which I would talk a little bit more because today's talk is really about the research that we are doing. The rest, I may touch on it a little bit, but we'll see whether the time permits or not. So I think I wanted to just show you a few projects that actually illustrate some of these principles and some of these ratings. Skyview and Dawson, Kuan, I think you like this building, I hope. But actually there are a few interesting things about this one for us because we have been monitoring this building and been collecting post-occupation surveys. So you can actually see some of the ratios here, but what is actually most important for us is the way we transform a very simple H or slab block and the way we sort of open it up in the middle and created a vertical void that created a vertical breezeway. And actually you do have a 1 to 2 meters induced air movement vertically, so that all the apartments, you open the windows, you have an effective cross ventilation created by a hot stack between ground level and the top level. There's an actual temperature difference. And you can see how we also layered in on almost every 11 floors, 200 meters in one direction sky park that people can actually use. And we repeated that 4 times, just from the point of view of increasing amenities in high density. So this is actually the unit plan. So this is the open up plan where we have these vertical breezeways. And as you can see from this picture, there are interesting layering of sort of bridges, but you have this vertical voids. But if I had some videos actually showing you that if you take pictures, some of these trees are always constantly moving, and that's because of the induced air movement in these vertical voids. So you can see from a section, it's actually divided into 4 parts, really because we wanted 80 homes to form one sky village and to create a sense of community in this sort of mega HDB development. So these are the interesting post-occupation surveys that we have collected. And what is interesting, there is actually an 18% savings in utility bills as compared to Sky Terrace, built at the same time. But because this building, because of the effective cross-ventilation, it actually uses less air conditioning. So the amount of energy used is actually 20% less. But actually what is also interesting is 1.3 times of the people here feel that their neighbors are considered friends. So the sense of creating the sky villages is actually validated through some of these surveys. Okay, this one maybe you all haven't seen it before. This is actually 15 years in the making. But this started off being a university in Dhaka for 8,000 people. It finished 15 years later with 20,000 students, 160,000 square meters over 2 hectares of land. So it's a plot ratio of 8. It's a mid-rise, high density, high amenity typology. But what is very interesting here is that we started off the project by being able to go zero energy, but then because of the aspiration of and the success of the university, they've been getting more students, and when we finished it was 20,000 students. So we couldn't achieve sort of zero energy, but I'll explain to you how we actually have succeeded in bringing it closer to zero energy, but not quite there yet. So this is a transformation of a simple messing by creating, in this case, horizontal 1 unit thick slabs, which then created an accentuated wind flow, the Venturi effect of wind coming in and then sort of elevated as it goes through it. And because of this, the classrooms can be effectively cross-ventilated. And also because of that, you have a higher oxygen content and less lower carbon dioxide content within the classroom. So the students and undergraduates here actually are more alert, basically. But this also allows us to invent the air conditioning system. And we've been working with Transolar to actually reinvent the cooling system for this building. So this is actually the resultant building in Dhaka. You can see Dhaka is really a sort of a very dense built-up environment and actually very low in public spaces. So the intention of this building was really to dedicate the ground level as a very public space, a community park for the people and the neighborhood, and then above is the safe and secure environment for the university, the academia. So the lower level is the park, but the upper level is actually the university, and you can see from the upper level, the plan is actually a single layer thick of amenities, where it becomes a very effective cross-ventilated sort of spaces. For 6 months of the year, they don't need air conditioning. Only during the other 6 months where it's really hot, then they have some form of cooling. And we actually got in Transolar to help us reinvent the cooling system. So it was a hybrid cooling system that we actually used, completely fresh air, but we reduced a little bit like what is being done in Singapore with SDE. But here there was this continual fresh air, but with a sort of a chill air only to about 21 degrees. So that it was substantially less, and that actually reduces the energy usage for air conditioning as compared by 50%. So in terms of the total energy sort of optimized for the building, in terms of from the optimizing the ME brought it down to 40%, and then the solar canopy at the top actually produced up to about, in the end, 30% of the total energy needs. But actually what is really quite successful for us is that, again, Dhaka is a little bit like Singapore. You know, they have completely almost used up all the land, but what we felt was very necessary was to actually give back as much land and space to the people. And when we talk about 100% green replacement, here it matters, you know. And when you talk about 100% community plot ratio where you give back to people, it matters because the whole site area, again, is actually utilized by the people. And we've been able to achieve this through being able to stack the layers in a way that we have got everything we wanted, including a cricket field at the very rooftop. So, but what really is the most heartening thing for me was when we inserted such a large building in a very everywhere is like this in Dhaka, but when we insert it in here, it will have some sort of impact on the city. It will have impact on the neighborhood. But we wanted this not to be a gentrification, but to be able to help improve the quality of life for the people. And what was really nice is that the development afforded people to walk through the site, walk through the building on the ground level to access to the neighborhood behind, shortening their sort of time to get back to their neighborhoods. But also because of the university with 20,000 students, the ground level and the second level of this the buildings around here, which is essentially a bit of housing, a bit of offices, quite mixed use, responded by becoming interesting internet cafes, the coffee shops, you know, things that actually supports the university and actually giving this neighborhood and the people who live here a little bit of a new sort of livelihood. So that was really quite nice. And you can see also interesting art that came out because of the students' revolution over there. I mean, but here you'll see some pictures. This is the ground level. We return it as a park for the people. And you can see how people were actually loving the ground level. And then large covered tropical spaces within the development. Because it's a mid-rise typology and moving 20,000 students up vertically, we had to use escalators. And dotted throughout the places, all these lovely, wonderful social sort of spaces, framed by vertical green screens that also reduces the heat on the building. And then, as you can see at the top, we have a 200-meter running track, competition track. We have a 25-meter short pool, swimming pool, and a cricket field. And then on top, the solar canopy that sort of offsets 30% of the energy consumption of this building. So the other one I just wanted to show you and give you some facts is this one. Because this one, we achieved 1,100% of green replacement when we count the vertical living facade. But the value of this idea here is seeing the material of a living green compared to other facades. And here is the surface temperature. So if you look at it, when you measure the surface temperature of one of the buildings here, which is also the tallest building in Singapore, you can see the surface temperature is about almost 50 degrees. And Oasia Hotel downtown with the living facade is 25 degrees. So one is actually radiating heat, right? Whereas the other one is actually absorbing heat. So, and I think this is a very clear indication of how, if you want to address urban heat island effect in the city, we really need to have a lot more landscaping, not just planting it on the ground, but also vertically as well. But what is also very interesting is Himalayan vouchers were a video making up on the building. And because the building looks like a cliff the vouchers find it as a habitat that they can actually relate to. So, and I think that is an interesting notion that built form making can also be catered for biodiversity. So Kampong Admiralty. Kampong Admiralty for us, what was really interesting is that we started looking at the building as a sort of a real landscape. In this case, using the verticality of it to become the phytoremediation of all the rainwater that comes through the building. So through all the levels, it collects, and then we have rain chains and curtains that flow from one flower bed to another, and then eventually it's completely cleansed. We reuse them for irrigation in the building. Any extra then gets discharged away. But one of the most interesting post-occupation surveys that we got was through one of the PhD student who worked on this building, was that quite a lot of the residents here for 2 weeks never come down to the ground level. They move between the community farm, the garden spaces, to the hawker center and the medical center, but never coming to the ground. So the notion that we had of a vertical city, one that actually thrives above rather than having to depend on ground level, actually has some validity here. So which is interesting for us. So from a point of view of a land-limited Singapore again, this notion provides a lot of evidence that we can actually, increase density, live in the sky, and don't rely so much on the ground. The ground level maybe should be for biodiversity, for nature, for planting of big trees that can actually sequester carbon. So this is the last chapter. Really is I had to thank Design Singapore who gave us a grant to actually study, for us to study what nature in a building is actually doing for us. And this is a research that concluded a couple of months ago. This is on our website if you're interested in seeing, but I'll just go through some of the interesting sort of revelation of this research. So the process was actually quite interesting, is that we selected our own buildings, target sites, where we 5 of them, where we had a lot of integrated landscaping within it. And then using baseline references, we compare against our own buildings, our target sites. We worked with, I have to say now, I don't know whether Anush Jain is here, because he was there he is. He's a collaborator on this. He did most of the hard work here. So thank you, Anush. And Shri is also here, who did the PhD on Kampong Admiralty. Thank you. And I think what was interesting here is that then we worked together to identify what is actually the landscape typology. We also conducted social surveys. Anush guys went on site to do the biodiversity survey, and then temperature readings, and then worked on the ecosystem services simulation. So I won't go through all the various target sites, but I will talk through just one, Kampong Admiralty. So here you can see the baseline references we selected was sort of a nearby precinct, and then also at the same time a nearby neighborhood park as well. They have to be at least 200 meters to 500 meters apart, so that some of these data collected will not be polluted. And then this is the basically the landscape element, and that we actually broken down into certain typology. Fringe is really being on the ground, basically the site areas, where because of the site coverage is actually, you can actually plant real trees, and then because the building was shaped like a hill, and then we also have the site that's facing the MRT, which was considered a cliff. So we also conducted social survey as part of this, and you can see it's quite interesting. Just to highlight a few key ones is that people come to this building, 84% because it's relaxing and 50% is cooling. So that's an interesting one. And then even 76% of the respondents think it's important to integrate greenery into urban spaces. And But what is also interesting from a community standpoint is that 67% go to these places, these gardens here with friends and the relatives. So in terms of the comparison of the species intensity, which is the quantum of it, the quantity of it, here you can see Kampong Admiralty has exceeded even that of the neighborhood park. This one we will probably have to examine a little bit more as to why this is so, but I think the key is I think there's a lot of fruiting trees being planted in Kampong Admiralty, whereas the neighborhood park is not a very, from a biodiversity point of view, not a very good one. And then in terms of the species as well, the diversity of species, it also is much higher than the neighborhood park. But you can actually see the overlap, the shared kind of species. Kampong Admiralty had a lot more compared to the others. And also we conducted temperature surveys itself generally. So basically in all the garden spaces, particularly the shaded one, becomes actually very cool spaces. So here in tropics we do want shaded spaces, and with landscaping it's even more desirable. So the temperature reduction is about 1.3% in average. Here you can see the heat map diagrams and how in total it translates to a UTCI reduction of almost 7 to 12%. So, but I think what is also important and also emerging signs is the amount of landscaping in the building is actually doing for us and for the planet. So here are the few things that were actually sort of simulated. And here you can see the ecosystem services of Kampong Admiralty. So comparing it against a pristine habitat, which Singapore used to be a lowland rainforest, you can see here they sort of average between maybe 20 to 25%. But in terms of air filtration, actually it's very interesting. It's often coming to 28 to 30% as an average. And the carbon stored within the development, something like 13%. So then we compared it against all our target sites from Park Royal and Pickering, Skyview, and Eveling Village, Kampong Admiralty, and Oasia Hotel Downtown. So this is the, I think what is interesting here is really the diagram on the right here, where we start to break down the various landscape typology, and then I think we are actually working out creating new ones, and I think this is where I said form follow systems is our sort of mantra, and that we can actually manipulate form and buildings to actually support a lot of systems. So here we are looking at across all of them the biodiversity, and you can see Kampong Admiralty actually scores very well. It's the first bar. But this is the, and then I think we were trying to do a qualitative sort of a evaluation or assessment, a framework for rating sort of integrated landscaping and buildings. And this, I won't go through it, but we came up with ratings of poor, moderate, good to exceptional. And that when we rate all these 5 buildings, you can see how they score. And the only one that didn't score too well was, I think, Park Royal and Pickering, because when we first started the time, it was really for the point of view of what looks good from a sort of biophilic quality. But as we move along, we realized that we need to create more diversity, more different species in it to attract different animals and so forth, insects and so forth. So that's why we're getting better at it, and with the latest ones, they all have got better scores. But this one, the last slide I was going to show you here, is very interesting. Just from the point of view of sort of regulating air quality and temperature. Oasia Hotel Downtown does super well. it almost goes up to almost 64% to remove air particle removal. Should we have haze, we want a building like this, basically, you know. And also from the point of view of urban heat island effect too, we want a building like that. So I think that is the understanding now we are getting of this green facade that we've got, a living facade. It actually does create. So with all this kind of ecosystem services, calculation and data, I think it provides valuable sort of insight into how we can actually evolve our buildings, our even urban planning to city planning. Because you can think of cities as rainforests as well. So we are not taking away from the nature and from the planet, but we are actually working along with it. Okay.
Thank you, Summ. We will now proceed with the panel discussion and Q&A.
So, thank you both. I think it was a great presentation, and it was a great scene setting, Prof. Cheong, also from your end, to get us to this point. A lot of conversation we've had. We've tried to define regenerative design in the first presentation by Prof. Cheong, and both of you have taken, in a way, the conversation around regenerative design, whether it's through retrofitting or through truly looking at nature in your own ways to move that forward. So the way I want to do this is, we won't go through the usual thing of me asking questions to all of them, and then if we have time, I pass it to you. I'm more generous today. So what we'll do is, I'll ask a question, and then we'll pass it to you guys. Let's have some questions from your end, and then I'll move to the second one, and then we'll move on. So we go back and forth, but I love this power that I have. I can decide who I want to ask. So be nice to me. But what I want to do is, and the way I want to go about doing is, I want to start with more a city or district scale, and then eventually get down to the building scale, and eventually get down to the people conversation as well. So hopefully you can ask questions accordingly as well. So let me start with this one, and I think Summ, kind of, you started touching on the city aspect already. By the way, when you spoke about comparability and that people won't go down a ground plane, I just thought of you. You could actually live there because you like not moving around more than 50 meters. You should live there. So let me start with the first one. And this is a city or a district scale conversation. You know? So both of you spoke about regenerative design through the lens of place-based factors that you mentioned, Fred, or nature-based factors, Summ. Once you've applied these factors understandably at your building level, or in Admiralty's case, in terms of still the development level, how would the application change at a city, or for that matter, a district scale? Because as soon as we get to that scale, this would mean at an ecosystem level, and that would mean more actors, stakeholders, policymakers. So what would you think are the challenges in your respective cities, and pick up a city that you want to have this conversation on, if your conversation had to get to that scale? And you touched on Singapore could be that rainforest. So how does that happen at the city scale?
Should I? I'll start. So I'll use the examples that I gave to kind of start the conversation. At a city scale, in Australia, there's still a lot that needs to happen in order for it to be promoted. Currently, there's not any policy, so there is a planning risk with the height of QQT, which forced the client's hand to retain the structure. So that was the instigator in that instance, and you know that's important. Then with the London projects, that was planning policy. We have a project now in Sydney that's saving twice the amount of carbon, embodied carbon, but that's not city-driven. There's no incentive yet in Sydney or in Australia to retain as much carbon as possible. The second example in Sydney is tenant focus. The developer knows if they build a more green, sustainable, low embodied carbon building, that they're more likely to attract tenants, because it's the industry that's pushing Australia. Australia, I think what needs to happen in Australia, or at least Sydney in particular, is Sydney has a design excellence process which allows developers and land building asset owners to get a 10% area bonus if they agree to a design excellence competition. That's important because the city is then part of the jury selection process, so the public domain, green factors, all of those actually increase when the city's involved. So I think they need to set some type of incentive up in the city to actually encourage reuse. In London, it was fear of not getting planning permission. So retrofit first. And then guidelines started to follow. But they are guidelines. They're not mandatory. So the city has to be one of those stakeholders that actually promotes it in a way that incentivizes this sort of approach. Because right now it's industry in Australia.
Thanks, Fred. Mansa?
I'll just touch on the tree scale that you talk about. I think from the building scale usually for us was a little bit more difficult because I think clients' objectives are not so much generous in nature. Yeah. And so I think for us, it was always a struggle to try and smuggle in a lot of some of our ideas and thinking. But along the way, we had good clients in our government, Skyville, we had Kampong MOT that sees the value of such things. So it's a lot easier because I think that's where we tended to do a lot more public projects rather than private. Private ones tend to support the other projects for us. So I think that's where I think from the point of view of seeing some of these sort of generous ideas coming through, the government plays a big part in it. From a bigger scale of things, from sort of a planning point, urban design, precinct scale of it, I think it's fairly similar, but I think things have changed now. Okay, I think everyone accepted that climate change is a real thing, and that I think a lot of enlightened developers are now looking at master plans that are, they're aiming for targets of sort of carbon negative or zero energy. I think that's now easier, and I think from an urban design point, I think that the change has already the trigger point has already come. But I think from a city point of view, I think that's going to be a tough one. As we've seen most cities, as part of the Lee Kuan Yew, governance is a critical thing. And most cities are not like Singapore. Singapore, unfortunately, a good thing, is very unique. We have such good governance and we have such good institutions. And I think if we work collectively together, we can actually solve a lot of these problems. But most cities can't. Most cities, your ruling party, your ruling government is only 4 to 5 years. And it's a very sad, I mean, you look around the world, I think it's pretty sad now, actually. That's where I think Singapore, we do have to value what we've got here. And that I think the way to go about tackling this is really working collaboratively and also to working closely together.
No, thanks for that. I think it's a very fair point. I was in another conference a month back, and they asked me this question around net zero cities. And in the introduction, they were talking about that when we started planning the whole 256,000 hectares of Indonesia capital city, and we were told net zero city. One thing is planning, and we did the plan and KPIs and everything. The other thing, and I said the biggest issue is always implementation. And they asked me what are the 3 most important things. I said implementation, because the capacity building from the government side needs to be there to be able to get there. So yeah, no, fair point. As I promised, I'm going to pass on to the floor. Any questions? And I'll stand up so that I know if anyone's asking a question. Over there. Okay. If the mic can reach, otherwise I can get that. There's a mic there, yeah.
Hi, I was going to challenge everybody and say that we use the word regenerative. There are all different terms: regenerative, rewilding, habitat restoration. I was just wondering, when we talk of regenerative, we forget that maybe we should actually start creating ecosystems that are essential, and instead of just restoring and just rehabilitating. So what are the views of these? Because we all realize that natural ecosystems are so important. And when we talk about climate change, it's actually biodiversity loss. That actually the solutions are always good for climate change, but climate change solutions might not necessarily be good for biodiversity loss. Comments from the panel? Thank you.
Thanks. Good question. I suppose I can answer it with...
That's a follow-up question.
Okay, all right.
I can see what I agree with her completely, all this read, right? I was still at the regenerative state. I think the higher aspirations will be more resilience in there, okay? Then it's an objective to be met rather than doing all this fanciful thing to creep towards it. You see, human beings are really strange, We say we try to learn from nature, but we actually do not. Okay? Carbon emission has been rising steadily, and nothing did anything to it until one little thing called the coronavirus came along, and that knocked down the emission down dramatically, for a little while at least. But after that, human beings went back to our behavior. Now it's coming back to the same projected figure again. So we do not learn from nature. We think we do, we say we do, but actually nature taught us a heavy lesson. We forget it within, 2 years? Comments, please.
Okay, I'll try to answer both. The industry is very slow moving, so you're absolutely right. The industry is, bricks and mortar traditionally. It's contractors that are used to doing things a certain way, developers used to doing a certain way. So it is a slow process. I think resiliency was the word that was used, and that relates to the first question. And maybe it relates back to the city versus building question as well. I do think it's important that we think about buildings in terms of resiliency. Our Sydney Fish Market that you saw an image of, which I hope to come back and tell you about at some point, that's a highly sustainable building. It reuses, it catches every drop of water that hits the roof, reuses it, reduces water usage by 50%, reduces energy loads by 35%. But there's one instance on that project where we wanted to make the area more resilient. There's occasionally heavy flooding in that area. And our project site is sitting over the base of a bay, and that water in that bay is quite dirty at times. And the reason for that is, of course, the sediment coming in from the larger harbor, but also the urban runoff. And there's a park across the street. And from a resiliency point of view, we thought it'd be a great idea if we could create a catchment in that area, and then filter it through biofiltration, and then allow it to go back into the water. So the site, the precinct becomes more resilient. However, that was out of our scope, and we were told very kindly by the state to focus on the fish market, but maybe another time. So I think it is, to solve resiliency, it can't be one site. It can't be one plot within the city. The city has to start thinking holistically about sites that, for example, that they own. And I think it can be done, maybe not at the large city scale to begin with. There's some policies that can encourage it, but at the precinct scale, smaller master plans that actually start to address local conditions that affect that particular location. And then you can deal more with it on a micro level versus the kind of macro large city, which sometimes seems overwhelming. But if you can handle resiliency in your precinct, I think that's one of the first steps.
Thanks.
I think the first step for us is to, as humans, see ourselves as part of nature. And I think we understand that we are part of nature, and that changes the whole perspective completely. And I think then we will be really designing for nature because we are part of it. Now I think that's a important mindset change. We need to acknowledge humans are part of the nature, and that then I think it's an easier thing. One thing I think we through our surveys and our understanding of building our integrated landscaping, and particularly the one in Oasia Hotel downtown, the reason why I decided I wanted to create a vertical green facade was because I felt that when we did all the horizontal ones, only the flying insects and birds could get to it. But the climbing ones, like squirrels and lizards, couldn't get to it. So it wasn't a very diverse kind of ecosystems. So that when we created one like that, the hope was that crawling animals, lizards and squirrels could come from the neighborhood park, which then hop on the trees and hop the buildings and climb up. So I have to tell you that the general manager of the hotel who runs that, on the 11th floor in the mornings, they see squirrels. And I think that's a challenge to Anush. She'll always say, no, animals can't go that high. So I think that's where I think the value of understanding the data from our buildings now is so important, because I think we then can create habitats for animals, and as part of us as humans, we can actually share those habitats. And I think that's an important one for us, is creating sort of habitats up in the sky that the biodiversity can thrive. So I think also from sort of taking this notion of having a park next to a building with integrated landscaping, also from a planning point of view, we should then start to think, okay, if we do have all this forest reserve, which very rich biodiversity, if we want to grow that, we need to start changing our rules. The buildings and the precincts next to it, maybe we should have more than 100% green replacement. There should be 200, 300% to amp it up. So only maybe in the city where it's so removed from the natural habitats of the biodiversity, then maybe 100%. So, and I think that's where I think the research that we are doing now is revealing a lot of such nuances that we can actually apply to planning.
Thanks for that. I think you kind of started to answer the question I wanted to ask on the people level, of how people get used to swimming with lizards in their Oasia hotel swimming pool on the top. I'm going to get to my second question, and then I'll come back to you all. I know everyone's enthusiastic about making their points, but I would love it to be a clear question so that we can get to the other questions as well, and more people can ask a question as well. So thanks for that. So I'm going to get to the building level. And this is probably touching on Fred, you touched on a bit on this one. So do you think in this climate emergency era, and Dr. Cheong highlighted that very clearly, 21st century icons, I would say all the examples that you both have given are like icons for us, 21st century, such as yours, by default need to be regenerative in thinking? And if yes, are we then bound by the ambition of our clients, especially the private ones, ecosystem players, and you touched on it, such as facade manufacturers and policymakers?
Do I think they need to be regenerative? The short answer is yes. We all need to do our part. I think the buildings that I was giving examples of, in the first instance, it is in fact do less harm by saving the embodied carbon, extending the life of the building. Does the industry, manufacturers need to catch up? I would say, of course, there's part of that, making facades that can generate energy, giving more choice for that as designers. But I think we saw from Summ's examples that the current industry can actually tackle regenerative design when there's clever thinking that goes into that. I think where the big gap is actually in policy globally. And incentives. We know that the circular economy is called the economy for a reason. If a project doesn't make economic sense, it doesn't go forward. So the industry needs incentives in order to kind of push in that direction. And again, it could be fear of not getting a proposal, a planning proposal through. But all the tools, I think, are there. How to retain a building to lower your carbon footprint, extend the life of a building, to create temperature drops. The image you showed, Summ, of the Oasia Hotel, 25 degrees versus 50 degrees, that's phenomenal. And that's the current market. So we don't need to make drastic improvements in the industry. We just need to be able to use the tools that are there and have clients and stakeholders that are encouraging it.
Thanks. Summ?
I think we need to go a little further. We should not do harm, but we should do good, basically. Unfortunately, because of COVID, most people didn't manage to go to the Singapore Pavilion Dubai Expo. And that's one of the projects I'm very, very proud of. Our firm did it, where we actually, in a desert, created a oasis where the temperatures were more than 10% less. So everyone was actually, it was a very popular pavilion, primarily because it's very cool. And during the time of, from 11 to 4, it's just not possible to walk around in the expo. But because of the pavilion that was so cool, we did something that was quite out-of-the-box thinking. We actually put solar panels on the roof completely to maximize the whole thing, but we did not want natural light to come in because we want all the plants to be shaded. But we used the energy from the solar panels to use grow lights, where it doesn't give off heat, but it gives off energy to the plants. And the plants were able to then have, that's the cooling effect for us, and it brought the temperatures down. So it's a wonderful pavilion. But sadly, we thought that because people could feel it and see it, we'll get lots of projects in Dubai. No, we did not. So unfortunately, I think only 1% of your clients and developer would actually do right, basically. 99% are just, not interested in it. And I think that's one of the biggest problem in the world, is that we are still not, we only look for our own personal gains, but not be generous and be thinking about the next person, the future generation, or for the planet, or for nature. Fortunately, that's that. So, and I think it's very necessary in this case for the city, for the country, to have regulations and to have sort of guidelines that nudge us clearly in this way.
And eventually those guidelines become real policies to change. Yeah, thanks for that. So we are still bound by our clients, unfortunately. Any questions from the floor? Yeah, sure.
I was just wondering which city building do you admire the most? Which city and building do you admire the most? Thank you.
Which one do you admire the most? The right answer. Singapore is the right answer, Fred.
Singapore? No, honestly, I think I would say, look, Australia is moving towards a greener development. They're now calculating embodied carbon on all new developments to get a database. But I think Singapore and Copenhagen, those cities in particular, have done a great job. I think both have something in common. The national government and the city government are actually quite close, which makes them a lot more agile. Copenhagen has a different climate. Of course, in Copenhagen, you want to keep heat in, which is important. There's a development in Nordhavn I think it was, we'll talk about it in the workshop tomorrow. It's district heating, it's district cooling. There's green biodiversity corridors. They're reusing materials. And a lot of that is part of the Copenhagen city policy. And in fact, their carbon targets are extremely low, almost unachievably low, in order for the industry to kind of push towards that. So I'd say Copenhagen is a wonderful place and the friendliest place in the world, although Singapore, I think, is right there as well. But from a planning point of view, the agility of both the cities, I think, allow it to be that testing bed for sustainability and regenerative design in two completely different climates.
favorite building. Today, it will have to be the Key Quarter Tower. As for cities, of course, Singapore, I love Singapore. But I think because I sit on the Lee Kuan Yew World City Prize, I've been to some cities and I appreciated the issues and the problems that bigger countries have. And I think the last one that I was so fortunate to go with the team to Mexico City. And it was easy to brush aside Mexico City because of the cartels and all, what you hear, what the propaganda you get out of Western media and all that. But I was astounded by how intelligent the people were, the people running the country, how committed and passionate they were. They made us work from morning 8 o'clock to almost 12 o'clock midnight to listen to them, you know. And the very last day of, I think 3 days, you know, and it was meeting the police commissioner, who himself was attempted an assassination attempt on him. Okay, and his driver died, but he survived it. And but the way they handled it was creating community centers in marginalized locations, and they were not only just social, educational. They were also crime prevention. Everything was disseminated just from this community center. It's called the Polaris. So it was so, and because we had to go there to sort of understand it and to actually see whether it's real or not. We went on our own to see it. My God, it was insane how successful they were, and it's just so impressive. But what also was really impressive was the fact that Mexico City isn't a very rich city, right? And but they actually used cable cars, which they learned from the previous laureate, Medellin. They created the longest cable car network in the furthest out from the fringe of the city. A network of almost 10 to 20 kilometers of cable car network that actually brought the people to the cities to work. Basically, there's only about 1 million in the city, and then another 15 million actually comes in to support it, you know. And these people moved in, and the times, the traveling time was reduced by a staggering more than a few hours, just by bringing them cable cars. And that was so amazing that it was a very low-cost solution, and that they were able to handle it, basically. So I think the Lee Kuan Yew World City Prize laureate cities are all great cities. Vienna is one of those ones. Mexico City, I have to say, I have to take my hat off to them. They were really, really passionate and such intelligent and smart people.
That's great to hear. And this is where I think it broadens up the conversation about regenerative cities. Just like sustainability when it kicked in, the regenerative is not just we focus on the nature, and all of that regeneration is also in the social regeneration aspect and how you use a mobility aspect, low cost, to make that all work. That's a great example. Anyone else? Any questions? Yes. Do you have a microphone coming there? Or you may have to go. Okay. Yep.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. My name is David from Biophilic. So here's the questions to the floor and to the panels as well. In what role does our foodscape play in our modern city of regenerative city in planning, and how can they be better integrated into future plannings?
All right. Food.
This would definitely be a GXN question. There's been several projects they've looked at where urban farming is looked at, and I think, of course, the purpose. Vegetation can come in a multitude of varieties, from biodiversity to keeping your food source actually quite close to reduce your carbon footprint. The Capital Land building, I've noticed they had some herbs and produce that was being produced. I know it's not high quantities, but I think it's also part of the kind of greening of buildings, to reduce the overall carbon footprint. I think part of the question about foodscape is also waste. I think there needs to be a way we think about how much food we're actually consuming. So, you know, we pay for a plate of food and we finish half of it. You know, maybe there's ways that we could actually start serving smaller quantities and kind of a pay as you eat in order to reduce waste, or if there is waste, actually using that waste in a biochar, for example, to help fertilize, you know, the plants and the city in that way. So I think the foodscape question is, one, reduce carbon by reducing transportation, make food local so you know where it's coming from. And then the other one is waste. How do we control waste in an intelligent way without disrupting the food chain and waste cycle?
Thanks, Fred. I mean, in Copenhagen, that's what I always feel. It's like pay as you eat. It's so expensive. Every bite, I feel like that's $5. That's under $10.
I have to encourage you to join me in a 1 meal a day diet. I'm very glad you asked this question because I spent 6 months to a year looking at Singapore's food master plan. And what is interesting is that most of our proteins, guess where it comes from? From Brazil, the other side of our planet. So you know how much carbon that is just to bring the food to us? So I think that is actually a bit shocking. But I think our definition of resilience at the moment maybe has to be rethought. The idea of food resilience is to distribute all our food sources so that we are not crippled by the fact if it's one place that we don't get it from. So maybe we should need to think of food as part of a self-sufficiency as well. We should be growing and fabricating our food, because when we start putting in the carbon involved in food production, we would have exceeded by too much. The food, if you look at it in the carbon dollars, is unaffordable for us, basically. So I think we need to rethink that, because actually food production is really very straightforward. Now with with PVs being very cheap, you can actually produce food using high intensity, sort of flattered factory kind of scenario, where you can actually have very good control, safety and everything. So it almost can be produced locally. And actually, when we look at the Lim Chu Kang master plan, we were able to achieve food self-sufficiency. It's not an issue. It's a matter of whether we think for resilience, it's how we see it. The way we see it is to actually have it produced in Singapore. And I think that's something that we need to rethink about it, because I think food production all in Singapore is possible. It's just done in a high intensity sort of manner. So, and I think that's a very interesting one, because I think we don't realize it, but our food is coming from all over the place, and actually the carbon involved with it is very high.
I think probably I'll add here. I'm a moderator, but I still want to share my story since I have the power to. Food's an interesting one, because people, when we as city planners, designers, think about cities, we look at the usual things about city thing in terms of infrastructure, like water, waste, energy, roads, infrastructure. When we're doing that Indonesia capital city, we had to design for 2 million population, and this is pre-COVID, when we said if we have to go net zero, we got to design, we got to plan a place where the food could be produced and reduce supply chain. This is pre-COVID, we were thinking supply chain reduction, and how do we plan and still produce food for the 2 million population around that region. And we started doing the calculation, detailed calculation of how much carbon it will generate to produce food there. We realized there is no way the city can be net zero, because Indonesians like the meat, and the meat production will kill the net zero aspect of the food production. In fact, it got to me, so you said for one meal a day, I became vegetarian whilst working in Indonesia capital city. I'm like, there's no way I can sell net zero cities being a meat eater. But this is the thing, that we have to start thinking about food as one of the big ecosystem designing within anywhere that you're doing a building, precinct, or a city for that matter. I've been told I had 2 minutes ago, but because everyone has gone beyond the time, I'm going to take the liberty too. So let's have another round, another question and from me, and then we go for one more to you guys. So we've touched a lot on the people thing, and I really don't want to lose out on that. So I think people thing is an interesting one, and the responsibility of architecture or architects or designers for that matter. So as it said, change takes time, but accepting change takes longer. And this is very much to do with people behaviors. So a regenerative community will need to live, act, behave, operate differently than what we currently do. So do you think architecture should be made responsible to intrinsically nudge the change in people's behaviors?
Thanks. Our mantra is architecture shapes behavior, so of course I have to say yes. But Munson made a good point earlier. He called smuggling the ideas into a project. There's an article by Alejandro Sao Paulo from FOA back in the day that also talks about that in reference to a project in Yokohama. But I think as architects we like to think we can change the world, but sometimes you do have to smuggle those ideas into projects. We're only as good as our client's ambition and what we can kind of respond to. But we all layer or smuggle, I like the term smuggling, ideas into projects. The Sydney Fish Market, rather than use dry bulb temperature as the measuring for comfort, we actually looked at thermal comfort in a different way, human comfort, and having it be an open air market versus a controlled AC space. And that was actually obviously changing the way we think about designing for breezes to come through both north, south, east, west. And we layered it by saving money on energy, and that's how we got that through. It wasn't enough to say that we were creating a comfortable environment. We had to associate it or smuggle it in with the energy and the cost savings. Another project is at EPFL in Switzerland. I was having a conversation earlier with Peter. There's a forest near the master plan that we were developing, and we smuggled, layered a green biodiversity corridor through there by enhancing the necessary items of that master plan, which were vehicular circulation and pedestrian flow, and layering it with essentially a green corridor. So as architects, we often have to layer these ideas into projects. One could say smuggle, sneak, layer, but we do have an obligation to actually nudge people's behavior forward.
Thanks for that.
I think it's the issue really at the end of the day is how do we effect change, isn't it? To change people is really quite hard, particularly when we are set in the ways. So even for myself to try and convince myself to do something, it's quite hard. But I think we do have to try. I think with the younger generation, they know that the climate change, they're going to live to feel the effect of climate change. So I think the younger generations, they are really in line with it. I think it's unfortunately our generation, the people who are still making decisions, needs to change. To realize that your decisions affect future generations. And I think it's we do need to really change our mindset and to really there's one new rating that I have in our new book. It's called the Good Ancestors Rating. We're going to measure our buildings to see whether our buildings is good for future generations. Not just for longevity of the building, but whether or not this is going to be a good ancestor building. And I think we have to think like that. Our Asian cultures have taught us that we need to look after future generations, but the commercial world has not taken note of that. And I think we do need to start thinking that we need to be good ancestors.
That's great. I mean, the Asian generation also should know that the younger generation look after the older generation as well. So with that, thank you very much, both of you. I think it was a fantastic conversation. Thank you all for being here beyond the time, and back to you.
Yeah, thank you, speakers and moderator. Please remain at the front. May we invite Edie to present our speakers with a token of appreciation. Edie, please.
Oh, great.
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, we have come to the end of our lecture. Once again, thank you for joining us at today's lecture series. We would appreciate if you could take a minute to leave your feedback and help us improve the lecture by scanning this QR code on the screen. Have a good evening, and we hope to see you again soon.